bright future, a promising young woman, and then vanished without a trace. A case that haunted a community for over 2 decades, filled with secrets, deception, and a suspect who lived in plain sight. How does someone disappear from a college campus, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions? And why did it take more than 25 years for justice to finally catch up? Tonight, we uncover the disturbing truth behind the Kristin Smart case. Welcome to Dark Chronicles, where shadows hide the truth. For years, Kristin Smart's disappearance remained a mystery. Her family pushed for answers, but law enforcement struggled to find concrete evidence. Without a body, prosecutors hesitated to move forward. PaulFlores, the last person seen with Kristin, continued with his life as if nothing had happened. He transferred schools, lived quietly, and never faced serious questioning. But Kristin's parents, Stan and Denise Smart, refused to let the case fade. They lobbied for more investigations, worked with private detectives, and spoke to the media. In 2002, 6 years after Kristin vanished, she was legally declared dead. It was a painful moment for the Smart family, but it did not stop them from seeking justice. Then, in 2016, the case took an unexpected turn. 2 decades had passed. Technology had advanced. Investigators revisited the case with fresh eyes. Chris Lambert, a journalist and podcaster, released a series called Your Own Backyard, which examined Kristin's case in detail. His work reignited public interest, and soon the authorities had new leads. Detectives searched PaulFlores' home and found items of interest. They also discovered disturbing allegations, claims that Paul had a history of predatory behavior toward women. But the most significant breakthrough came in March 2021. Law enforcement executed search warrants at multiple locations, including the home of Paul's father, Flores. In Ruben's backyard, investigators unearthed suspicious soil disturbances, evidence suggesting that a body may have been buried and later moved. This was the break they had been waiting for. On April 13, 2021, PaulFlores was arrested and charged with the murder of Kristin Smart. His father, Flores, was charged as an accessory, accused of helping conceal Kristin's remains. Prosecutors presented their case. They argued that PaulFlores killed Kristin during an attempted sexual assault in his dorm room. They suggested that Ruben helped him dispose of the body sometime after the crime. They pointed to cadaver dog alerts, inconsistencies in Paul's statements, and disturbing evidence found at the Flores home. But the defense had its own arguments. They claimed that there was no hard proof Kristin had been in Paul's room that night. They pointed out that her body had never been found. They argued that after 25 years, the case was built on circumstantial evidence and speculation. The trial was about to become one of the most watched cases in California history. But would justice finally be served? In July 2022, the trial of Paul and Flores officially began. It took place in Monterey County after a judge ruled that the case had received too much local attention in San Luis Obispo, making a fair trial impossible there. The prosecution laid out its case step by step. They argued that PaulFlores had a pattern of predatory behavior long before Kristin Smart disappeared. Several women testified that Paul had assaulted them in the past, creating a chilling image of a man who targeted vulnerable women. The prosecution also called cadaver dog handlers to the stand. These dogs had signaled Kristin's scent in Paul's dorm room years ago, but back then the evidence had been considered inconclusive. Now, it was being used to paint a picture of what happened that night. Years later, as renewed interest in the case gained momentum, prosecutors finally had enough evidence to bring PaulFlores to trial. The courtroom was packed with journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and, most importantly, the grieving Smart family, who had waited decades for this moment. One of the most powerful pieces of evidence was forensic testing conducted on items retrieved from Paul's father's home. Ground-penetrating radar had detected human decomposition in the soil beneath the deck, and when forensic specialists dug into the ground, they uncovered remnants of biological material. While DNA testing couldn't confirm an exact match to Kristin, experts testified that the decomposition was consistent with a long-buried body. The prosecution also brought forth witnesses who claimed Paul had made disturbing comments about Kristin over the years. One former friend recalled Paul drunkenly boasting that Kristin would never be found. Others described his predatory behavior toward women, reinforcing the theory that Kristin had been targeted. On the other hand, Paul's defense team argued that all the evidence was circumstantial. They insisted there was no direct proof tying him to Kristin's disappearance and accused the prosecution of using speculation rather than solid forensic data. The trial was filled with emotional moments, including testimony from Kristin's parents. They described the agony of waiting for answers and the psychological toll of never being able to lay their daughter to rest. As they spoke, the courtroom fell silent, with even seasoned reporters visibly shaken. PaulFlores' attorney, Robert Sanger, aggressively pushed back. He attacked the credibility of the prosecution's witnesses, pointing out inconsistencies in their statements. He claimed that the cadaver dog evidence was unreliable, arguing that the alerts weren't enough to prove Kristin had ever been in Paul's room. Most importantly, he hammered on the fact that there was no body. Without physical remains, he argued, how could the prosecution even prove that Kristin was dead? But then came a bombshell moment. A former tenant of Flores' home took the stand. She testified that one night, years after Kristin's disappearance, she had seen Paul and Ruben working under the deck in the middle of the night, digging. This matched what forensic experts had found in 2021. Evidence suggesting a body had once been buried and removed in that same location. The prosecution pushed the jury to connect the dots. Kristin had been buried under Ruben's deck for years before being relocated. After months of testimony, the jury deliberated. The media held its breath. The Smart family, after 26 years, waited for justice. Then, on October 18, 2022, the verdict was announced. PaulFlores was found guilty of first-degree murder. Flores, however, was acquitted of accessory charges. The jury did not believe there was enough proof to convict him. Paul was later sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. For the Smart family, this was a long-awaited victory, but there was still one heartbreaking reality. Kristin Smart's body had never been found. The case was finally closed. But the biggest question still remained. Where is Kristin? Following the verdict, PaulFlores was taken into custody, beginning what will likely be the rest of his life behind bars. But the story was far from over. For many, justice felt incomplete. The Smart family had fought tirelessly for over 2 decades to bring Kristin home, yet they were still left without her remains. Law enforcement vowed that they would not stop searching. Detectives continued following leads, scouring rural areas, wooded landscapes, and properties linked to the Flores family. The media also played a huge role in keeping the case alive. Podcasts, documentaries, and investigative journalists continued to dig into the details, hoping to uncover anything that might lead to Kristin's final resting place. Despite the guilty verdict, the Smart family's fight wasn't over. They publicly pleaded with PaulFlores to reveal the location of Kristin's body, but he remained silent. In the months following his conviction, the Smarts worked on strengthening laws surrounding missing persons cases, hoping to prevent other families from suffering the same agonizing weight they endured. They also continued running the Kristin Smart Scholarship, helping students pursue higher education in Kristin's honor. Even with Paul behind bars, the case still raised questions. Some believed that more people knew what happened to Kristin, that Paul didn't act alone. Others speculated that Kristin's remains had been moved multiple times, making it nearly impossible to locate them now. Some even questioned whether Ruben had connections that helped cover things up for so long. More than 2 decades of pain, questions, and legal battles led to this moment. PaulFlores may have finally been convicted, but the ultimate truth still lies buried somewhere, hidden beneath years of secrets and silence. The world may have heard the guilty verdict, but the question that haunts this case remains the same. Where is Kristin Smart? For 26 years, the Smart family lived in a nightmare without answers. They fought against a system that seemed unwilling or unable to bring them closure. From the moment Kristin disappeared, her parents, Stan and Denise Smart, believed that PaulFlores was responsible. But for years, they had to watch as he walked free, living his life as if nothing had happened. It wasn't just the lack of an arrest that hurt them. It was the way Kristin's case was handled from the beginning. When Kristin was first reported missing, the Cal Poly campus police failed to treat it as an emergency. Instead of launching a full-scale search, they assumed she had gone off on her own. For days, critical evidence was lost. Security footage was never recovered. PaulFlores was never properly interrogated while the trail was still fresh. By the time law enforcement realized that something was truly wrong, it was already too late. From the very beginning, the investigation into Kristin Smart's disappearance was plagued with missteps. When her friends reported her missing, the authorities initially dismissed their concerns, believing she had simply gone away for the weekend. This delay proved to be a critical mistake, one that potentially allowed key evidence to be lost forever. Detectives later combed through Kristin's dorm room, but there were no signs of a struggle, no immediate evidence pointing to foul play. Witnesses recalled seeing her intoxicated at the party and being escorted back to her dorm by PaulFlores. And yet, Paul's behavior in the days following Kristin's disappearance raised serious red flags. When questioned by police, Paul gave inconsistent statements. Initially, he claimed he parted ways with Kristin near her dorm, but when officers noticed a black eye on his face, Paul's explanation changed. First claiming he got it during a basketball game, then later suggesting he had accidentally hit himself while working on his car. These inconsistencies only deepened suspicions against him. Investigators eventually obtained a warrant to search Paul's dorm room. Inside, they found disturbing evidence, a mattress with potential bloodstains, which unfortunately was never properly tested due to the slow response of forensic teams at the time. Despite these leads, authorities struggled to build a concrete case, and PaulFlores remained free. Over the years, more disturbing information about PaulFlores came to light. Numerous women came forward, revealing that he had a history of sexual violence. Many had eerily similar stories. Paul would target intoxicated women, isolate them, and assault them when they were most vulnerable. One victim described him as a predator in plain sight, someone who had been hurting women for decades without facing consequences. These allegations became key evidence in the trial. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man with a pattern, one that started long before Kristin vanished, and likely continued for years after. So what changed? Why, after 2.5 decades, was Paul finally arrested? It all came down to new forensic technology and relentless investigative pressure. Cadaver dogs alerted to PaulFlores' dorm room, indicating the presence of human remains. Soil samples from Ruben Flores' home suggested that Kristin's body had been buried there and later moved. Witness testimonies showed that Paul was the last person seen with Kristin, and his explanations never added up. Finally, after years of frustration, there was enough evidence to move forward with an arrest. Paul Flores was charged with first-degree murder, while his father, Ruben, faced accessory charges for allegedly helping hide Kristin's body. The courtroom became a battleground with prosecutors, defense attorneys, and witnesses fighting over what really happened that night in 1996. The Smart family sat through every moment, listening as the defense tried to poke holes in the case, while prosecutors laid out the horrifying details of Kristin's final moments. But the most chilling part? Paul Flores never showed remorse. Paul Flores' defense team fought aggressively, claiming that the case was built on circumstantial evidence. They argued that there was no body, no physical proof that Kristin was deceased. The prosecution was relying on old, unreliable witness testimony. The cadaver dog alerts and soil samples were not definitive proof that a crime had occurred. Their strategy was simple: introduce doubt. They pointed out that many years had passed, memories fade, and evidence deteriorates. But despite their efforts, the weight of the prosecution's case was overwhelming. The prosecution had a clear narrative. Paul Flores had a history of predatory behavior. On the night of May 25, 1996, he targeted Kristin Smart, lured her away under the guise of helping her, and then ended her life. They emphasized Paul was the last person seen with Kristin, and his story never added up. The cadaver dog evidence, which suggested a body had been in his dorm room, the suspicious activity at Ruben Flores' property, where Kristin's remains may have been buried and later moved. Paul's history of violence against women, showing a pattern of behavior that pointed to guilt. But perhaps the most damning moment of the trial came when new witnesses took the stand. During the trial, multiple women came forward with terrifying accounts of how Paul had assaulted them. One woman described how Paul had drugged and attacked her, similar to how Kristin may have been overpowered. Another recounted a chilling experience. Paul had bragged about knowing how to get rid of a body. These testimonies solidified the prosecution's case. Paul Flores wasn't just a suspect, he was a predator. After decades of waiting, the moment finally arrived. The jury deliberated, weighing years of evidence, witness accounts, and forensic findings. Then the verdict was read: Paul Flores, guilty of first-degree murder. His father, Ruben, however, was acquitted, leaving many wondering if justice was truly served. But for Kristin's family, this was a victory. It was not just about Paul Flores. It was about finally getting the truth. After 26 years, Kristin Smart's story was no longer just an unsolved mystery. It was a lesson in perseverance, a reminder that justice, no matter how delayed, can still be achieved. And that's the chilling story of the Kristin Smart case. Decades of mystery, relentless investigations, and a family's unshaken fight for justice. What do you think really happened that night? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this case as haunting as I did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a deep dive into the darkest chronicles of true crime. This is Dark Chronicles, where the truth is always waiting to be uncovered. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.